Vivian Pierce slammed his fist on the mahogany desk, sending pens scattering across the polished surface as he glared at the resume in his hand. Another unqualified candidate. Is it really so difficult to find someone competent in this city? He tossed the paper aside and raked his fingers through his dark hair, the weight of running a multi-million-dollar tech company pressing down on his shoulders. At 32, Vivian had built Vision Tech from nothing but a brilliant idea and sheer determination. Now his company was worth over $200 million, with offices spanning 3 continents. But success had come at a price. His personal assistant of 5 years had just quit to move across the country with her fiancé, leaving him scrambling to find a replacement who could keep up with his demanding schedule and exacting standards. The intercom on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Pierce, there's one more candidate waiting to be interviewed. Should I send her in or reschedule?" His temporary receptionist's voice sounded hesitant, probably sensing his foul mood even through the speaker. Vivian sighed heavily. "Fine, send her in. Let's get this over with." He straightened his tie and stood as the door opened, expecting another fresh-faced business school graduate with more confidence than experience. Instead, the woman who entered his office caught him completely off guard. She wasn't dressed in the typical interview attire, no power suit or stiletto heels. Instead, she wore a simple navy blue dress that was professional but not trying too hard, paired with sensible flats. Her auburn hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, and she carried a well-worn leather portfolio instead of the latest designer bag. "Mr. Pierce," she said, extending her hand with a firm grip that matched his own. "I'm Ruby Ortiz. Thank you for seeing me today." Her voice was calm and self-assured, with none of the nervous energy he'd endured from the previous candidates. There was something refreshingly straightforward about her. "Please, sit down." Vivian gestured to the chair across from his desk, quickly scanning the resume she handed him. "I see you've worked as an executive assistant before, but not in the tech industry." Ruby nodded. "That's correct. I spent the last 5 years managing operations for the CEO of Crescent Publishing. Before that, I was an administrative coordinator at Westfield Medical Group." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Publishing and healthcare. Neither are particularly relevant to what we do here at Vision Tech." "With respect, Mr. Pierce, my job isn't to understand the technical aspects of your business. You have engineers and developers for that," Ruby responded without hesitation. "My job is to organize your life so you can focus on running your company. Calendar management, travel arrangements, correspondence, prioritizing demands on your time, those skills transfer across any industry." Her confidence wasn't brash or cocky, it was simply matter of fact. For the first time that day, Vivian felt a spark of interest. "Tell me about a crisis you managed in your previous position," he challenged. Ruby didn't miss a beat. "Last year, our CEO was scheduled to deliver a keynote speech at a major industry conference in Tokyo. 12 hours before his flight, he came down with severe food poisoning. I rearranged his entire presentation to be delivered via live video conference, coordinated with the event organizers across time zones, arranged for professional lighting and recording equipment to be set up in his home office, and prepared a modified speech that acknowledged the situation while still delivering the key messages. The presentation was saved, and nobody outside our immediate team ever knew it almost didn't happen." Vivian leaned back in his chair, impressed despite himself. "And why are you leaving Crescent Publishing?" Something flickered across Ruby's face, the first crack in her professional veneer. "The company was acquired last month. The new management is bringing in their own team." "I see." Vivian studied her for a moment. She was probably in her late 20s, and there was an intelligence in her hazel eyes that he found intriguing. "This position is demanding, Ms. Ortiz. I work long hours, travel frequently, and expect immediate responses at all hours. My last assistant lasted 5 years, which is something of a record. Most burn out within 18 months. "I understand," Ruby replied. "I'm not looking for a comfortable job, Mr. Pierce. I'm looking for a challenging one where my organizational skills make a real difference." Vivian stood up and walked to the window overlooking the San Francisco skyline. His instinct told him she was the first candidate who might actually make his life easier rather than creating more work. But something made him push a little harder. One last question. What do you know about me, Ms. Ortiz? Ruby didn't hesitate. I know you built Vision Tech from the ground up after dropping out of Stanford's computer science program. Your first round of funding came after you spent 3 days camping outside a venture capitalist's office. You're known for being brilliant but demanding, and you donate anonymously to several STEM education programs for underprivileged youth. You're also notoriously private about your personal life, which is why there's very little information about you that isn't related to your business ventures. Vivian turned around, genuinely surprised. You've done your homework. I believe in being prepared, she said simply. When can you start? Tomorrow, Ruby answered. Be here at 7 a.m., Vivian said, extending his hand again. Welcome to Vision Tech, Ms. Ortiz. As they shook hands, neither of them had any idea how significantly their lives were about to change. The next morning, Ruby arrived at the Vision Tech headquarters at 6:45 a.m. The security guard at the front desk looked surprised to see anyone arriving so early, but he checked her temporary ID and directed her to the executive floor. The office was quiet, with only the hum of the air conditioning breaking the silence. Ruby found her desk a sleek workstation positioned just outside Vivian's office and began familiarizing herself with the computer system. By the time Vivian strode through the door at 7 a.m. sharp, she had already logged into the company network, reviewed his calendar for the day, and prepared a cup of coffee exactly as the handover notes from his previous assistant had specified, black with a single teaspoon of sugar. Good morning, Mr. Pierce, she said, rising from her desk and following him into his office with a tablet in hand. You have a conference call with the Tokyo team at 8:30. Followed by a meeting with the product development department at 10. The quarterly financial reports arrived by email this morning, and I've forwarded them to you with the key points highlighted. Vivian paused in the act of hanging up his coat, looking mildly surprised. That was fast. I came in early to get up to speed, Ruby explained. The Tokyo call that's with Nakamura, correct? Ruby nodded. Yes. They're presenting the latest user testing results for the Asian market rollout. Good. Have lunch brought in for the product development meeting and make sure the financial reports are printed out. I prefer to review those on paper. Already done, Ruby said, gesturing to the neatly organized folder on his desk. The lunch order has been placed with options that accommodate all dietary restrictions on the team. For a moment, Vivian just stared at her, as if trying to determine if this efficiency was too good to be true. Then he gave a curt nod. Thank you, Ms. Ortiz. Ruby is fine, she offered. I prefer to maintain professional boundaries, Ms. Ortiz, he replied, his tone making it clear the matter wasn't up for discussion. Let me know when the Tokyo team is on the line. Ruby simply nodded and returned to her desk, not taking his formality personally. She'd worked for demanding executives before and understood the importance of establishing a professional dynamic from the start. The day progressed at a breakneck pace. Vivian moved from one meeting to another, making critical decisions that impacted hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in company resources. Ruby kept pace with him, anticipating his needs and quietly resolving logistical issues before they became problems. By the end of the day, Vivian found himself impressed. When most of the staff had gone home, he called Ruby into his office. How was your first day? He asked, leaning back in his chair. Busy but manageable, Ruby replied honestly. Your previous assistant left excellent notes on your preferences and routines. Lisa was very thorough, Vivian agreed, a hint of something almost like fondness crossing his face before his professional mask slipped back into place. I'd like to review tomorrow's schedule before you leave. As they went through the next day's appointments, Vivian was struck by how quickly Ruby had adapted to his work style. She didn't waste time with unnecessary chatter, focused on relevant details, and wasn't intimidated by his direct manner. I see you've rearranged my meeting with the marketing team, he noted, spotting a change from what had been tentatively planned. Yes. Based on the notes from today's product development meeting, I thought it made more sense to have that conversation after you've reviewed the prototype revisions. I can change it back if you prefer. Vivian shook his head. No, that's actually more logical. Good call. As Ruby gathered her things to leave, Vivian found himself asking, "Do you have any questions for me? About the job or expectations?" Ruby considered for a moment. Just one. I noticed you haven't taken a lunch break away from your desk in over a month, according to your calendar. Is that by choice or necessity? The question caught him off guard. I don't really think about it. There's always more work to do than time to do it, Ruby nodded. I understand, but research shows productivity actually increases with proper breaks. Maybe we could work on finding 20 minutes here and there for you to actually step away from your desk. Just a thought for the future. Before Vivian could respond, she added, Good night, Mr. Pierce. I'll see you at 7 tomorrow morning. As she walked out, Vivian found himself staring at the door long after it closed behind her. In 5 years, Lisa had never commented on his work habits. Ruby Ortiz had been here less than 12 hours and was already suggesting changes to his routine. He should have been annoyed. Instead, he found himself intrigued. Over the next few weeks, Ruby proved herself indispensable. She learned the rhythms of vision tech with remarkable speed, anticipating problems before they arose, and creating systems that made Vivian's hectic schedule run more smoothly than it ever had before. She was professional, but not cold, efficient, but not robotic. She seemed to know instinctively when to push back against his demands and when to simply execute them without question. For a man accustomed to being the smartest person in the room, it was both refreshing and occasionally unsettling to work with someone so competent. One evening, nearly a month after Ruby started, Vivian was preparing for an important pitch to potential investors. The presentation had been in development for weeks, but he still wasn't satisfied with the flow of information. Something's missing, he muttered, pacing his office as Ruby sat nearby taking notes. The technical specifications are solid, but it's not compelling enough. Ruby hesitated, then asked, May I make a suggestion? Vivian gestured for her to continue. You're leading with features when you should be leading with stories, she said. These investors aren't technologists. They're business people looking for the next big return. Start with how your software solves real human problems, then back it up with the technical details. Vivian stopped pacing and looked at her with narrowed eyes. That's marketing talk. The technology speaks for itself. To you it does, Ruby countered respectfully. But I've sat in on enough of your meetings to know that not everyone sees the world through your lens. The most successful presentations I've witnessed connect technology to human experience. For a moment, Vivian looked like he might dismiss her suggestion outright. Then he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Show me what you mean. Ruby reworked the presentation's opening sequence, replacing technical specifications with a narrative about how Vision Tech's new software platform would transform everyday experiences. Vivian watched over her shoulder, occasionally suggesting adjustments, but mostly allowing her to reshape his approach. When they finally finished well after midnight, the presentation was dramatically different and undeniably stronger. This is good, Vivian admitted, reviewing the final slides. Very good, actually. Ruby smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her that reached her eyes. Thank you for trusting my input. Their eyes met for a moment longer than necessary, and Vivian felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. He quickly looked away. It's late. I'll call you a car, he said, reaching for his phone. That's not necessary. I can take an Uber. It's 1 a.m., Ms. Ortiz. The company car service is safer. Ruby didn't argue further, recognizing his concern as genuine rather than controlling. As she gathered her things to leave, Vivian found himself asking, How did you develop such a good understanding of presentation dynamics? That's not typically part of an assistant's skill set. Ruby paused at the door. My father was a professor of communications. Dinner table conversations in our house revolved around the art of effective messaging. A shadow crossed her face. He passed away during my senior year of college. I'm sorry, Vivian said, surprised by the personal revelation and his own sincere response to it. It was a long time ago, Ruby replied with a small shrug. Good night, Mr. Pierce. Good luck with the investors tomorrow. After she left, Vivian sat at his desk, thinking about their interaction. In the month Ruby had worked for him, this was the first personal detail she had shared. He realized he knew almost nothing about her beyond her professional capabilities, a stark contrast to how much she seemed to understand about him and his needs. The investor meeting the next day was a resounding success. The revised presentation approach connected exactly as Ruby had predicted, and by the end of the day, VisionTech had secured an additional $30 million in funding for their expansion plans. The executive team went out to celebrate, and Vivian surprised everyone, including himself, by inviting Ruby to join them. This win is partially yours, he explained when she looked uncertain. You should be part of the celebration. At the upscale restaurant, Ruby found herself seated beside Vivian, nursing a glass of champagne as the executives around them grew increasingly boisterous with each toast. She felt out of place among these people who earned many times her salary, but tried not to show it. You seem uncomfortable, Vivian observed quietly, leaning closer so only she could hear. Not uncomfortable, Ruby clarified, just aware of my position. Which is? I'm your assistant, Mr. Pierce. These people are your executive team and business associates. There's a difference. Vivian frowned slightly. You've earned your place at this table today, Ms. Ortiz. Don't diminish your contribution. Before she could respond, the conversation around them shifted to weekend plans. Vivian, you're still coming to the charity gala on Saturday, right? Asked Marcus Chen, VisionTech's chief financial officer. The organizers specifically asked if you'd be attending. Vivian groaned. I forgot about that. Is it really necessary? It's the biggest philanthropic event of the season, Marcus reminded him, and considering 3 board members are on the organizing committee, yes, it's necessary. Ruby quietly pulled out her phone and checked Vivian's calendar. You don't have any conflicts, she informed him, and the company already purchased a table. Fine, Vivian conceded. I'll be there. Great, Marcus said, then glanced at Ruby. You should come too, Ruby. All the executives bring +1s, and Vivian always shows up alone. It makes him look like even more of a workaholic than he actually is. Ruby nearly choked on her champagne. Oh, I don't think that's not appropriate, Marcus, Vivian cut in, his voice sharp. Marcus held up his hands. I didn't mean it like that. I meant she could attend as your assistant, handle networking, take notes on potential business connections, that sort of thing. An uncomfortable silence fell over their corner of the table. Ruby felt her face growing warm. I'll consider it, Vivian finally said, effectively ending the conversation. Later, as the group began to disperse, Vivian pulled Ruby aside. I apologize for Marcus. He was out of line. It's fine, Ruby assured him. No harm done. Vivian hesitated, then said, Actually, it might not be a bad idea for you to attend the gala, professionally speaking. These events can be useful for making business connections, and having you there to help me navigate the social obligations would be helpful. Ruby studied his face, trying to determine if this was a genuine request or if he felt obligated after Marcus's suggestion. Are you sure? I wouldn't want to overstep my role. You would be attending in a professional capacity, Vivian clarified. Many executives bring their assistants to these functions. Then I'd be happy to help, Ruby agreed. Should I make my own arrangements or? The company will cover everything, Vivian assured her, and I can send the car to pick you up. As they parted ways outside the restaurant, Ruby couldn't help but feel that something had shifted in their professional dynamic. The line between boss and assistant seemed slightly less defined than it had been just hours before. Saturday evening arrived, and Ruby found herself nervous as she prepared for the gala. VisionTech had arranged for a stylist to help her select an appropriate gown, a simple but elegant floor-length dress in deep emerald that complemented her auburn hair and hazel eyes. She'd initially protested the expense, but Vivian had insisted it was a business cost, no different than any other professional attire required for a work function. When the company car arrived at her modest apartment, Ruby was surprised to find Vivian himself in the back seat rather than just the driver. "Mr. Pierce," she said as she slid into the car beside him, "I didn't expect you to pick me up personally." Vivian looked up from his phone, and for a brief moment he seemed at a loss for words. "You look very professional, Ms. Ortiz." "Thank you," Ruby replied, trying not to feel disappointed by his deliberately neutral compliment. "So do you." Vivian was impeccably dressed in a tailored tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame. With his dark hair neatly combed and his usually intense expression softened slightly, he looked less like a demanding tech CEO and more like the eligible bachelor that the business magazines often described him as. "I thought we could review the guest list on the way," he said, handing her a tablet. "There are several people I need to speak with tonight, but I'd like to keep the conversations brief." Ruby took the tablet, slipping back into her professional role. "I've already flagged the highest priorities based on current business initiatives. I can help create natural transitions if conversations start to drag." Vivian looked surprised. "You've already reviewed the list?" "Of course," Ruby said. "That's my job." A small smile touched his lips. "You consistently exceed expectations, Ms. Ortiz." The charity gala was held at the city's most prestigious hotel, with the ballroom transformed into an elegant wonderland of twinkling lights and elaborate floral arrangements. As they entered, Ruby was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Vivian Pierce rarely attended social functions, and never with a companion. "Remember, you're here to work," Vivian murmured as they made their way through the crowd. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Ruby nodded, understanding that his reminder was meant to protect her from gossip as much as to establish boundaries. For the next 2 hours, they moved through the gala with practiced efficiency. Ruby helped Vivian navigate the social obligations he found so tedious, smoothly extracting him from conversations that dragged on too long and ensuring he connected with the key contacts they had identified. She took mental notes of potential business opportunities, occasionally typing brief reminders into her phone. What surprised Ruby was how seamlessly they worked together in this setting. Without discussing it explicitly, they had developed a subtle nonverbal communication system. A slight tilt of Vivian's head meant he wanted to move on. A discreet touch on his arm from Ruby indicated someone important approaching from behind. They functioned like a well-oiled machine, anticipating each other's needs without having to voice them. During a brief lull in the networking, Ruby excused herself to visit the ladies' room. As she was washing her hands, she overheard 2 women talking by the mirrors. "That's Pierce's new assistant," one woman said in a hushed tone, the redhead in the green dress. "She's pretty," the other replied. "I wonder if she's sleeping with him yet." "Give it time," the first woman laughed. "Lisa held out for almost a year before she gave in, from what I heard." Ruby froze, her hands still under the running water. "No way," the second woman argued. "Pierce is a lot of things, but he doesn't seem like the type to pressure employees." "Who said anything about pressure? Have you seen him? I'd volunteer as tribute." They both laughed and exited the restroom, leaving Ruby standing there, deeply unsettled by their conversation. Was this what people thought when they saw her with Vivian? More disturbingly, was there any truth to what they'd said about his previous assistant? When she returned to the ballroom, she found Vivian scanning the crowd with a slight frown. His expression relaxed when he spotted her. "There you are," he said as she approached. "I was about to send a search party." "Sorry," Ruby replied, struggling to meet his eyes. "There was a line." Vivian studied her face. "Is everything all right? You seem upset." "I'm fine," she assured him, forcing a smile. "Just a little tired. These events are more draining than I expected." Vivian checked his watch. "We've made all the necessary connections. We could leave now if you'd like." Ruby hesitated, then nodded. "That might be best." As they waited for the valet to bring their car, Ruby stood slightly apart from Vivian, lost in thought. The overheard conversation had triggered doubts she hadn't previously considered. Had she been naive to think their working relationship was based purely on professional respect? "You've been quiet since we left," Vivian observed as they settled into the back seat of the car. "Are you sure nothing happened?" Ruby considered deflecting again, but found she couldn't. I overheard some women talking in the restroom. About us. Vivian's expression hardened. What did they say? They implied that you and your previous assistant were involved, and suggested I would be next. Ruby kept her eyes fixed on her hands, folded in her lap. I know it's just gossip, but it made me wonder how our professional relationship is perceived by others. For a long moment, Vivian was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with controlled anger. Lisa and I were never involved, ever. She worked for me for 5 years and maintained a strictly professional relationship the entire time. She's now engaged to a man she's been dating since before she started working for me. Ruby looked up, surprised by the intensity of his response. I don't mix business with pleasure, Ms. Ortiz, Vivian continued. I never have. It's unprofessional and potentially exploitative given the power dynamic. I'm sorry, Ruby said quickly. I didn't mean to imply. You have nothing to apologize for, Vivian interrupted. The fault lies with people who have nothing better to do than spread malicious rumors. They rode in silence for several minutes before Vivian spoke again, his voice softer now. I value your work, Ms. Ortiz. You're exceptionally good at your job. That's the beginning and end of our relationship, and anyone who suggests otherwise is both incorrect and inappropriate. Thank you for clarifying, Ruby replied, feeling simultaneously relieved and, oddly, a little disappointed. I value our professional relationship as well. When they arrived at Ruby's apartment building, Vivian insisted on walking her to the door, despite her protests that it wasn't necessary. Thank you for your help tonight, he said as they reached her apartment. You made the evening far more bearable than it would have been otherwise. Just doing my job, Ruby replied with a small smile. See you Monday morning, Ms. Ortiz. Good night, Mr. Pierce. As she watched him walk back to the waiting car, Ruby tried to ignore the confusing mix of emotions stirring within her. She had taken this job because she needed employment after the publishing house restructuring, not because she was looking for complications. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for her demanding, brilliant, unexpectedly thoughtful boss. Yet, as she prepared for bed that night, Ruby found herself replaying their conversations, analyzing his expressions, and wondering if the strict professional boundaries Vivian insisted upon were entirely for her benefit, or if they were a wall he had built to protect himself as well. The weeks following the charity gala brought a new intensity to Vivian and Ruby's working relationship. If anything, Vivian became more formal, more careful to maintain professional distance. Ruby matched his tone, focusing solely on the work and ignoring the occasional flutter in her chest when he would unexpectedly praise her efforts or when their hands would briefly touch as she handed him documents to sign. Spring turned to summer, and Vision Tech entered a critical phase of product development that required Vivian to travel frequently between their offices in San Francisco, New York, and London. Ruby accompanied him on these trips, managing logistics and ensuring he could focus entirely on the business challenges at hand. It was during a particularly grueling week in London that the carefully maintained professional boundary between them first began to crack. They had been working until nearly midnight in Vivian's hotel suite, preparing for the next day's board presentation. Ruby was exhausted but determined not to show it as she reviewed the financial projections one last time. The third quarter forecast still seems optimistic given the manufacturing delays, she noted, stifling a yawn. Vivian looked up from his laptop and really saw her for the first time in hours, the dark circles under her eyes, the slight slump of her shoulders. He closed his laptop with a decisive click. Enough. We're done for tonight. But we haven't finalized the... It can wait until morning, Vivian interrupted. You've been working for 16 hours straight, Ms. Ortiz. Even I have limits. Ruby wanted to argue but found she didn't have the energy. All right, I'll see you at 6 a.m. then. As she gathered her things to return to her own room down the hall, a sudden thunderclap shook the windows, followed immediately by a power outage that plunged the suite into darkness. Perfect timing, Vivian muttered. Stay put. There should be emergency lights soon. But the emergency lights didn't come on. Outside, the rain pounded against the windows, illuminated occasionally by flashes of lightning. After a few minutes, Vivian's phone rang. "Yes?" he answered. "I see. How long?" "Fine. Thank you for the update." "What's happening?" Ruby asked from somewhere in the darkness. "That was hotel management. Lightning struck a transformer. The entire block is without power, including the hotel's backup generator. They estimate at least 4 hours before it's restored." Ruby fumbled for her phone to use as a flashlight. "I should try to get back to my room before the stairwells get too dark." "The elevators are out and we're on the 28th floor," Vivian reminded her. "You're welcome to take the stairs, but it might be more practical to wait it out here." As if emphasizing his point, another crash of thunder rattled the windows, and the rain intensified. "You're right," Ruby conceded. "I'm sorry for the awkward situation." "It's hardly your fault that London weather and infrastructure have conspired against us," Vivian replied, and Ruby could hear the hint of amusement in his voice. "There are candles in the bathroom amenities kit. I'll find them." Soon, the suite was dimly lit by several small candles placed strategically around the living area. In the soft, flickering light, the formal hotel suite took on an almost intimate quality. "You should take the bedroom," Vivian offered. "I can sleep on the couch." "That's not necessary," Ruby protested. "The couch is fine for me." "I insist, Ms. Ortiz. I'm taller than you, and that couch is barely 6 feet long." Ruby knew better than to argue when Vivian used that tone. "Thank you, then." An awkward silence fell between them as they both realized the unusual circumstances they found themselves in. After a moment, Vivian walked to the minibar and pulled out 2 small bottles. "Scotch?" he offered, "since we're apparently not going anywhere for a while." Ruby hesitated, then nodded. "Why not? It's technically after hours." Vivian poured the amber liquid into 2 glasses and handed one to Ruby. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Ruby felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. "To weather disruptions," Vivian said, raising his glass slightly. Ruby smiled and clinked her glass against his. "To adaptability." The scotch burned pleasantly as it went down, warming her from the inside. For a few moments, they sipped in companionable silence, the storm raging outside contrasting with the calm within the candlelit suite. "May I ask you something personal, Ms. Ortiz?" Vivian finally said. Ruby looked up, surprised. "Of course. Why did you really leave Crescent Publishing? I checked they didn't lay off their entire executive support staff during the acquisition." Ruby stared into her glass, considering how much to reveal. "You're right. I wasn't entirely forthcoming during my interview." "I suspected as much," Vivian said, but his tone wasn't accusatory. Ruby took another sip of scotch for courage. "The new CEO made it clear that certain personal accommodations would be expected from his executive assistant. When I declined, my position was eliminated." Vivian's expression darkened. "He propositioned you?" "Not explicitly enough to trigger a harassment claim," Ruby explained, "but the implication was unmistakable. I could have fought it, but it seemed easier to leave with a severance package and a clean reference." "That's reprehensible," Vivian said, genuine anger flashing in his eyes. "No wonder my assurances about our professional boundaries were so important to you." Ruby nodded. "I appreciated your clarity on that subject." "It's rare in my experience." "It shouldn't be," Vivian replied firmly. Another silence fell between them, but this one felt different, more comfortable, as if a wall had come down. "What about you?" Ruby asked. "If you don't mind me asking, why is someone like you still single? The business magazines are constantly speculating." Vivian's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "You read those tabloid business articles about me?" "Research," Ruby said with a slight blush. "When I was preparing for my interview." Vivian swirled the scotch in his glass. "The simple answer is that relationships require time and attention. Building Vision Tech has been my priority for the past decade." "And the complicated answer?" Vivian looked at her for a long moment, as if deciding whether to continue. "The complicated answer is that I watched my parents' marriage disintegrate because my father was always chasing the next business opportunity. He was never present, even when he was physically in the room. My mother eventually left, and I can't blame her. I decided long ago that I wouldn't make promises I couldn't keep." "That's surprisingly self-aware," Ruby commented. I'm full of surprises, Ms. Ortiz, Vivian replied with a rare, genuine smile. As the night progressed and the storm continued to rage outside, they found themselves talking more openly than they ever had before. Vivian shared stories about the early days of vision tech, including failures that had never made it into the press. Ruby told him about growing up as the daughter of a professor, surrounded by books and ideas. "So that explains your extensive vocabulary," Vivian noted. "I've been impressed by your writing since you started." "Words were currency in our household," Ruby explained. "My father would give us $1 for every new word we used correctly at the dinner table. My brother and I became very adept at incorporating obscure terminology into casual conversation." "You have a brother?" "Yes, Ryan. He's 2 years younger and works as a wildlife photographer. He's currently somewhere in Borneo photographing orangutans." "Quite different career paths," Vivian observed. "We're different people," Ruby said with a shrug. "He inherited our father's passion for knowledge, but not his structured approach to life. I'm the opposite. I love systems and organization." "Lucky for me," Vivian said, his voice softer than usual. Their eyes met across the candlelit space, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Ruby was the first to look away. "It's getting late," she said, setting down her empty glass. "We should try to get some rest before tomorrow's presentation." Vivian nodded, the moment broken. "You're right. Take the bedroom. There are extra blankets in the closet if you need them." "Thank you," Ruby said, standing. "Good night, Mr. Pierce." "Under the circumstances," Vivian replied, "I think you can call me Vivian, at least until the power comes back on." Ruby smiled. "Good night, Vivian." "Good night, Ruby." It was the first time he had used her first name, and as Ruby closed the bedroom door behind her, she knew something fundamental had shifted between them, something that couldn't be undone by the return of electricity or daylight or professional boundaries. The London board meeting was a success, despite their lack of sleep and the lingering power outages across parts of the city. As they flew back to San Francisco the following day, Ruby noticed that Vivian had reverted to calling her Ms. Ortiz in front of others, but there was a new warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, a subtle acknowledgement of their shared confidences during the storm. Back in San Francisco, summer turned to fall, and the pace at Vision Tech grew ever more frantic as they prepared for a major product launch. Ruby and Vivian settled back into their efficient working rhythm, but there were small changes that an observer might have noticed. Vivian occasionally bringing coffee for Ruby instead of the other way around. Ruby feeling comfortable enough to gently tease him about his notorious impatience. Lunch ordered for both of them when working through midday became necessary. They were careful to maintain professionalism, especially around others, but there was no denying the growing connection between them. Still, neither was willing to acknowledge it directly or risk the complications that might arise from admitting their feelings. Then came the day of the product launch, the culmination of months of preparation, and the most significant release in Vision Tech's history. The tension throughout the company was palpable as they gathered in the main conference room to watch the live stream of Vivian's presentation at the tech industry's biggest annual convention. Ruby had helped Vivian prepare for weeks, refining his presentation and anticipating potential questions. She had planned to accompany him to the convention center, but at the last minute, a critical issue with the event logistics required her to remain at the office to coordinate with the technical team. "You'll be brilliant," she assured him as he prepared to leave. "You know this product inside and out." Vivian looked uncharacteristically nervous. "I wish you were coming with me." "I'll be watching every minute," Ruby promised, "and I'm only a phone call away if you need anything." Vivian nodded, then impulsively reached out and squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Ruby." The use of her first name in the office, where he had always been so careful to maintain formality, didn't escape her notice. Before she could respond, he was gone, striding toward the elevator with the confidence of a man about to change the tech landscape forever. The presentation began flawlessly. Vivian was charismatic and commanding as he introduced Vision Tech's revolutionary new software platform. The live stream showed an engaged audience, and the social media response was immediate and enthusiastic. Then, halfway through the demonstration, Disaster struck. The prototype failed spectacularly, freezing on screen before shutting down completely. The live stream captured Vivian's momentary look of shock before he recovered, attempting to restart the system with no success. In the Vision Tech conference room, a horrified silence fell as they watched their CEO facing the nightmare scenario of every product launch. Ruby's phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. "Technical team says it's a server issue. Need 10 minutes to fix. Help." Without hesitation, Ruby stood up. "I need someone from marketing to give me talking points about the platform's community impact initiatives, right now." As the team scrambled to provide what she needed, Ruby was already texting Vivian back. "Tell audience you're going to use unexpected technical difficulty as an opportunity to highlight platform's social impact while team resolves issue. Talking points coming in 2 minutes." On screen, they watched Vivian check his phone, his expression shifting from tension to relief. He looked directly into the camera and smoothly transitioned from the technical demonstration to a passionate discussion about how Vision Tech's platform would be made available to educational institutions in underserved communities. Ruby sent the talking points as promised, and Vivian incorporated them seamlessly into his impromptu presentation, buying precious time for the technical team to resolve the server issue. By the time he circled back to the demonstration, the platform was functioning perfectly, and the audience seemed to have forgotten the earlier glitch. When the presentation ended to enthusiastic applause, the Vision Tech office erupted in cheers and sighs of relief. Ruby slipped away to a quiet corner and called Vivian. "That was masterful," she told him when he answered. "No one would ever know there was a problem." "It was your quick thinking that saved it," Vivian replied, the relief evident in his voice. "I don't know what I would have done without you." "That's why you pay me the big bucks," Ruby joked, trying to lighten the moment. "I don't pay you nearly enough," Vivian said seriously. "I need to see you when I get back to the office. There's something important we need to discuss." Ruby's heart skipped a beat. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," Vivian assured her. "Just wait for me, all right?" Of course. For the next 2 hours, Ruby tried to focus on the post-launch tasks that required her attention, but her mind kept returning to Vivian's words. What did he want to discuss? Had the near disaster of the product launch made him reconsider some aspect of their working relationship? When Vivian finally returned to the office, he was immediately surrounded by the executive team, all clamoring to discuss the presentation and the early market response to the platform. Ruby watched from a distance as he handled each conversation with his usual efficiency, but she noticed his eyes seeking her out across the room. Finally, as the excitement began to die down, Vivian made his way to her desk. "Can we talk privately?" he asked, his voice low. Ruby nodded and followed him into his office, closing the door behind them. Vivian didn't sit down behind his desk as she expected. Instead, he stood by the window, looking out at the city skyline. "Today made something very clear to me," he began without preamble. "Something I've been trying to ignore for months." Ruby's throat felt dry. "What's that?" Vivian turned to face her. "I can't imagine doing this without you. Any of it. Not just the work, but everything." Ruby stood very still, afraid to misinterpret his words. "Vivian, I know the timing is terrible," he continued, running a hand through his hair in an uncharacteristic gesture of nervousness. "We're in the middle of the biggest product launch in company history. There are 1,000 reasons why I shouldn't say this right now, but I can't keep pretending." He took a step toward her. "I have feelings for you, Ruby. Feelings that go well beyond professional appreciation or even friendship." Ruby felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. For months she had been carefully suppressing her growing attraction to him, convinced that acknowledging it would only complicate their working relationship and possibly jeopardize her position. "I don't expect you to reciprocate," Vivian added quickly when she didn't immediately respond, "and I want you to know that your job is secure regardless of how you respond. I would never want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable." "I'm not uncomfortable," Ruby finally managed to say. "I'm surprised. You've always been so insistent on maintaining professional boundaries." "Because I didn't want to be like the men you've worked for in the past," Vivian explained. I didn't want you to think I hired you for any reason other than your qualifications, or that I expected anything from you other than your professional expertise." He took another step closer. "But today, watching you save the product launch from 3 miles away, I realized I've been lying to myself. My feelings for you have nothing to do with your job performance, though that remains exceptional. I'm attracted to your intelligence, your quiet confidence, your compassion, your subtle sense of humor." Ruby found herself moving toward him, drawn by the sincerity in his voice and the vulnerability in his eyes, a side of Vivian Pierce few people ever saw. "I've been fighting the same feelings," she admitted. "I was afraid acknowledging them would change everything." "It will change everything," Vivian agreed, now close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "But maybe that's not a bad thing." Ruby took a deep breath. "There are complications we need to consider. I work for you. There's a power dynamic that can't be ignored." "I know," Vivian said. "If you want to keep things professional, I'll respect that completely and never mention this again. But if you're willing to explore what might be possible between us, we can figure out the logistics. You could transfer to another department. Or—" "I don't want another job," Ruby interrupted. "I love working with you." "So do I," Vivian said softly. "That's part of the problem." For a long moment they stood looking at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Ruby made a decision. "I think," she said carefully, "that we should take some time to think about this. The product launch has us both running on adrenaline and emotion. We should be certain before we do anything that might affect our professional relationship." A flash of disappointment crossed Vivian's face, but he nodded. "You're right. As usual." "That doesn't mean my answer is no," Ruby clarified, her heart racing. "It just means I want us both to be sure." "Fair enough," Vivian agreed. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." The weekend after the product launch, Ruby found herself unable to focus on anything but her conversation with Vivian. She had spent months suppressing her feelings, convincing herself that her attraction to him was one-sided and inappropriate. Now that she knew he felt the same way, she found herself alternating between elation and anxiety. On Sunday afternoon, her phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Thinking it might be work-related, she answered. "Ruby Ortiz speaking." "Ms. Ortiz, this is Martha Pierce, Vivian's mother." Ruby nearly dropped the phone in surprise. "Mrs. Pierce, how did you get my number?" "Vivian's previous assistant gave it to me for emergencies," Martha explained. "And I'd say this qualifies. Vivian was in a car accident last night." Ruby's blood ran cold. "Is he all right?" "He's stable but sedated. Broken leg, concussion, and some internal bruising. He's at California Pacific Medical Center." "I'll be there right away," Ruby said, already searching for her car keys. "Thank you," Martha replied, sounding relieved. "He'd want you here, I think." The drive to the hospital was a blur. Ruby's mind filled with worst-case scenarios despite Martha's assurance that Vivian wasn't in critical danger. When she arrived at the hospital, she found Martha Pierce sitting alone in the waiting room, a slender, elegant woman in her early 60s with Vivian's same intense dark eyes. "Mrs. Pierce?" Ruby approached hesitantly. "I'm Ruby Ortiz." Martha stood and embraced her unexpectedly. "Thank you for coming so quickly. Vivian's always saying how efficiently you handle everything." "He talks about me," Ruby couldn't help asking. Martha's expression softened. "More than he probably realizes. But that's my son, brilliant about business, oblivious about his own feelings." Before Ruby could process this revelation, a doctor approached them. "Mrs. Pierce, your son is awake and asking for his phone. We've explained he needs to rest, but he's rather insistent." Martha sighed. "That sounds like Vivian. May we see him?" "Briefly," the doctor agreed. "He needs to remain calm." As they entered Vivian's hospital room, Ruby's heart clenched at the sight of him. He lay in the hospital bed looking uncharacteristically vulnerable, his left leg elevated and encased in a cast, a bandage around his head and various monitors attached to his chest. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Ruby?" I called her, Martha explained. I thought you might need her. I'm sorry to intrude, Ruby said quickly, but I wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm fine, Vivian insisted, though he clearly wasn't. Just a minor accident. A drunk driver ran a red light and T-boned your car, Martha corrected. That's not minor, Vivian. Vivian winced as he tried to sit up straighter. The company, the product launch, can wait until you're recovered, Ruby finished firmly. Marcus can handle the immediate follow-up, and I can coordinate everything else remotely. See, Martha said to her son, this is why you need her. Now I'm going to find some decent coffee, and you two can talk about whatever it is that's making you both look at each other like that. After Martha left, an awkward silence filled the room. I didn't ask her to call you, Vivian finally said, but I'm glad she did. Ruby moved closer to his bedside. You scared me. When your mother called, I thought... She broke off, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Vivian reached for her hand, wincing slightly at the movement. I'm not going anywhere, Ruby. It takes more than a drunk driver to get rid of me. Ruby squeezed his hand gently. Good, because I've made a decision. About? Us, she said simply. Life's too short for hesitation when you know what you want. Vivian's eyes never left hers. And what do you want? You, Ruby answered. But we need to do this right. I can't keep working directly for you if we're going to explore a personal relationship. It wouldn't be appropriate for either of us. I agree, Vivian said. We could move you to a different department, maybe. Actually, Ruby interrupted, I have a better idea. The head of operations position has been vacant for 3 months. I have the qualifications, and you know I understand the company inside and out. Vivian looked surprised. You want to join the executive team? I want a position where I can continue to contribute to Vision Tech without the complications of being your direct report, Ruby clarified. Unless you don't think I'm qualified. You're overqualified, Vivian said firmly. I just didn't realize you were interested in operations management. Ruby smiled. There's a lot about me you don't know yet, Vivian Pierce, but I'm hoping you'll take the time to find out. Vivian's answering smile transformed his face despite the bruises and fatigue. I'd like nothing better. Just then, Martha returned with coffee. She took one look at their joined hands and raised an eyebrow. Should I come back later? No, Vivian said, not letting go of Ruby's hand. But you might want to sit down. We have some changes to discuss. The transition wasn't seamless. There were whispers and speculation when Ruby was promoted to head of operations, with some assuming she had leveraged her relationship with Vivian to advance her career, despite the fact that they had been careful not to begin dating until after her position changed. But Ruby quickly proved herself in the new role, bringing the same efficiency and insight to operations that she had demonstrated as Vivian's assistant. She hired her own replacement, a no-nonsense former military officer who could keep up with Vivian's demanding pace, and established herself as a respected member of the executive team. Vivian, meanwhile, discovered that having Ruby as a professional peer rather than an employee brought an unexpected benefit. She was even more willing to challenge him when she thought he was making a mistake. Their occasional professional disagreements led to better decisions for the company, even if they sometimes continued the debates over dinner. Their personal relationship evolved more slowly than their professional one. Both were cautious, aware of the potential complications, and determined not to rush. Their first official date didn't occur until 2 weeks after Vivian was released from the hospital, and even then, they chose a quiet restaurant far from the business district to avoid prying eyes. This feels strange, Ruby admitted as they studied their menus, being with you outside of work with no professional reason. Good strange or bad strange? Vivian asked, watching her over the top of his menu. Ruby considered the question. Different strange. I've spent the last 6 months learning everything about your professional needs and preferences. Now I get to learn about the rest of you. Such as? Such as, Ruby said with a smile, whether you always order the most expensive wine on the menu, or if that's just when the company is paying. Vivian laughed, a genuine, uninhibited sound that Ruby had rarely heard from him. I order what I like, regardless of price. Life's too short for bad wine. See? I'm learning already. By the time autumn turned to winter, they had settled into a rhythm that balanced their professional responsibilities with their growing personal connection. At work, they maintained appropriate boundaries, addressing each other formally in meetings and avoiding public displays of affection. After hours, they gradually let down their guards, revealing the parts of themselves they had kept hidden behind professional facades. Ruby discovered that Vivian was an excellent cook who found preparing elaborate meals therapeutic after stressful days. Vivian learned that Ruby played the piano beautifully, but only when she thought no one was listening. They shared books, debated politics, and occasionally argued about which classic films were truly deserving of their legendary status. They also helped each other heal old wounds. Vivian opened up more about his parents' divorce and his complicated relationship with his father, who had died never fully reconciling with his son. Ruby shared the full story of her humiliating exit from Crescent Publishing and her struggles to be taken seriously in professional settings. "I used to think I needed to be twice as prepared, twice as efficient, and twice as careful as anyone else just to be considered competent," she confessed one evening as they sat on Vivian's balcony overlooking the bay. Being a woman in corporate environments often feels like starting the race 20 yards behind everyone else. Vivian took her hand. "For what it's worth, you're the most competent person I've ever worked with regardless of gender." "I know that now," Ruby said. "But for years, I was afraid to ask for what I wanted or to believe I deserved more than what I was offered." "And now?" Ruby turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the city lights below. "Now I know exactly what I want, and I'm not afraid to reach for it." The first time Vivian told Ruby he loved her was not a carefully orchestrated moment. It happened on a Tuesday morning as they were both rushing to get ready for an early meeting. Ruby was searching frantically for her missing phone while simultaneously trying to zip up her dress. "Have you seen my—" she began, turning around to find Vivian holding out her phone with one hand while offering to zip her dress with the other. "Thank you," Ruby said, relieved. "You're a lifesaver." "I love you," Vivian replied simply, as if commenting on the weather. Ruby froze, her phone halfway to her bag. "What did you say?" Vivian looked momentarily surprised by his own words, then broke into a warm smile. "I said I love you. I didn't plan to say it now, with both of us running late for the quarterly review, but it's true. I love you, Ruby Ortiz." Ruby's carefully constructed morning schedule suddenly seemed completely irrelevant. She stepped forward and kissed him deeply, her hands framing his face. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips, "even when you make us late for meetings." The quarterly review started 15 minutes behind schedule that day, but no one commented on the fact that both the CEO and the head of operations arrived simultaneously, slightly breathless and with matching smiles they couldn't quite suppress. As their one-year anniversary approached, marking both Ruby's time at Vision Tech and the beginning of their romantic relationship, Vivian began planning a surprise. He worked with Ruby's brother Ryan, finally back from Borneo, to arrange a weekend trip to the small coastal town where Ruby had spent summers as a child. The weekend of the trip arrived, and Vivian managed to get Ruby away from the office without revealing their destination. As they drove north along the coast, Ruby gradually realized where they were headed. "We're going to Mendocino," she asked, recognition dawning as the familiar landscapes appeared. Vivian smiled. "Ryan mentioned it was your happy place growing up. I thought it would be nice to see it with you." "It's perfect," Ruby said softly, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "But how did you talk to Ryan without me knowing?" "I have connections," Vivian replied mysteriously. "Your brother is remarkably easy to bribe with high-end camera equipment." Ruby laughed. "That sounds like Ryan." The small inn where they stayed overlooked the ocean, and their suite featured a private balcony where they could watch the waves crash against the rugged coastline. After checking in, they spent the afternoon exploring the town, with Ruby pointing out landmarks from her childhood: the ice cream shop that still used the same recipes, the bookstore where she'd spent rainy days, the beach where her father had taught her to skip stones. That evening, they had dinner at a local restaurant recommended by the innkeeper, enjoying fresh seafood and local wine as they watched the sun set over the Pacific. As they walked back to the inn along the moonlit path, Vivian seemed unusually quiet. "Is everything okay?" Ruby asked, concerned by his silence. "Perfect," Vivian assured her, taking her hand. "Just thinking about how much has changed in a year. All for the better, I hope." "Beyond anything I could have imagined," Vivian said. "When you walked into my office that day, I was looking for an assistant. Instead, I found the most important person in my life." Ruby smiled up at him. "And I was just looking for a job after a professional setback. I never expected to fall in love with the demanding CEO everyone warned me about." When they reached a scenic overlook along the path, Vivian stopped walking. "This seems like the right place," he said, almost to himself. "Right place for what?" Ruby asked, confused. In answer, Vivian reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Ruby's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a stunning emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. "Green," he explained, "to remind you of the dress you wore the night I realized I couldn't imagine my life without you." Ruby's eyes filled with tears as Vivian dropped to one knee on the moonlit path. "Ruby Ortiz," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "You walked into my office as a job applicant and reorganized not just my calendar but my entire life. You challenge me, support me, and make me a better person every day. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Ruby whispered, then louder. "Yes, absolutely yes." Vivian slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that communicated everything words couldn't express. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing and crying at the same time. "I can't believe you planned all this," Ruby said, admiring the ring that sparkled in the moonlight. "I had help," Vivian admitted. "Your brother, my mother, and half the executive team were in on it. Turns out I'm not the only one who thinks we belong together." As they walked back to the inn, arms wrapped around each other against the cool ocean breeze, Ruby thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from the formal interview in his office to planning a life together. "What are you thinking about?" Vivian asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was just remembering something your mother said to me in the hospital," Ruby replied. "That you were brilliant about business but oblivious about your own feelings." Vivian laughed. "She wasn't wrong. It took nearly losing you to make me realize what was right in front of me." "You never almost lost me," Ruby corrected him. "I was just waiting for you to catch up." 6 months later, Ruby and Vivian were married in an intimate ceremony at Vivian's family home in Napa Valley. The guest list was small, just family and close friends, including the Vision Tech executive team that had become a second family to them both. Ruby's brother Ryan served as her man of honor, while Vivian's mother Martha beamed proudly from the front row. The ceremony took place at sunset, with the vineyards providing a stunning backdrop as they exchanged vows they had written themselves. "I promise to challenge you when you need challenging," Vivian vowed, holding Ruby's hands in his, "to support you when you need supporting, and to love you always in every role you choose to take on in this life." "And I promise to remind you that there's life beyond the office," Ruby replied with a smile, "to stand by you through success and failure, and to love you completely brilliant mind, demanding nature, and all." At the reception that followed, Marcus Chen, now Vision Tech's president while Vivian had transitioned to chairman of the board, gave a toast that had everyone laughing. "When I suggested at that dinner 2 years ago that Ruby should accompany Vivian to the charity gala, I had no idea I was setting in motion the events that would lead us here today," he said, raising his glass. "I'd like to think I deserve a finder's fee, but I'll settle for seeing my friend happier than I've ever known him to be. To Ruby and Vivian." Later, as they danced beneath strings of twinkling lights, Vivian pulled Ruby close and whispered, "Have I told you today that you're the best decision I ever made?" Ruby smiled up at him. "Better than dropping out of Stanford to start Vision Tech?" "Much better," Vivian confirmed. "The company made me successful, but you made me happy. There's a difference." "Well," Ruby replied, "for someone who claimed to be bad at relationships, you're doing pretty well so far." "I have excellent assistants," Vivian said with a grin, spinning her in a circle that made her wedding dress flare around her. As the night came to a close, Ruby and Vivian slipped away from the celebration to the vintage Aston Martin that would take them to the airport for their honeymoon in Italy. Before getting into the car, Ruby tossed her bouquet, which was caught, to everyone's amusement, by Vivian's no-nonsense assistant. "Think that's an omen?" Vivian asked as they drove away, the sounds of their friends' cheers fading behind them. "Maybe," Ruby replied. "Or maybe it just means that assistants to demanding executives occasionally get happy endings too." Vivian reached over and took her hand, the gold of his new wedding band catching the moonlight. "I prefer to think of it as a happy beginning." 2 years after their wedding, Ruby and Vivian welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Valerie, honoring both Vivian's initial and the Latin root meaning strong. With her mother's auburn hair and her father's intense dark eyes, she became the center of their world. Parenthood changed them both. Ruby, who had been promoted to chief operations officer shortly after their marriage, arranged for a more flexible work schedule that allowed her to be home with Valerie in the mornings. Vivian, to the shock of the business world, announced he would be taking a full 3-month paternity leave, setting a new standard for Vision Tech and the tech industry as a whole. "My father was never present," he explained to Ruby as they discussed his decision. "I won't make the same mistake with our daughter." On Valerie's first birthday, as they watched her tentatively walking between them in the backyard of the home they had purchased together, Ruby reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "If someone had told me 3 years ago that the intimidating CEO I was interviewing with would become my husband and the father of my child, I would have thought they were crazy," she said, leaning against Vivian's shoulder as they sat on a blanket in the grass. "And if someone had told me that the assistant I hired would completely transform my life and priorities, I would have fired them for being delusional," Vivian replied with a laugh. "Yet here we are." "Here we are," Ruby agreed, watching as Valerie plopped down on the grass and looked up at them with a gummy smile that melted their hearts every time. Vision Tech continued to thrive under their combined leadership, with Vivian's visionary strategy complemented by Ruby's operational excellence. But they were careful to maintain boundaries between work and home, creating space for their family to grow and flourish away from the demands of the business world. When Ruby discovered she was pregnant with their second child 2 years later, Vivian surprised her by suggesting they both step back from day-to-day operations at Vision Tech. "We've built an excellent executive team," he pointed out as they discussed the future. "Maybe it's time to let them take more responsibility while we focus on the bigger picture, both for the company and for our family." "Are you suggesting semi-retirement at 37? Ruby asked, amused by the idea of her workaholic husband voluntarily reducing his role. "I'm suggesting balance," Vivian clarified. "Strategic oversight of Vision Tech rather than daily management, more time with our children, maybe even that foundation for STEM education we've talked about starting." The Vivian Pierce, who had interviewed her 5 years earlier, would never have made such a suggestion. He had evolved from a man defined solely by his work to someone who understood that success could be measured in many ways. As their family and priorities continued to evolve, Ruby and Vivian remained each other's strongest supporters and most trusted advisors. They navigated parenthood, business challenges, and life's inevitable ups and downs as a team, their partnership stronger for having begun as a professional relationship built on mutual respect. Sometimes, late at night when the children were asleep, they would reminisce about their unlikely beginning, the demanding millionaire and his efficient assistant, both too focused on their careers to recognize what was developing between them. "Do you ever regret not acting on your feelings sooner?" Ruby asked one such night as they sat on their back porch, watching the stars appear above the city lights. Vivian considered the question carefully. "No," he finally answered. "We needed that time to build a foundation of respect and trust. If we'd rushed into a relationship, it might not have lasted." "Always the strategist," Ruby teased, leaning into his embrace. "It worked out, didn't it?" Vivian replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. From hiring decision to happily ever after. And as their children grew and their partnership deepened with each passing year, they remained grateful for that first interview that had changed the course of both their lives, proof that sometimes the most unexpected job applicant can become the most irreplaceable person in your world.